Thank you for joining us. Today's panel is about a topic that everybody deals with, or almost everybody deals with at some point in their life, negativity. And we're going to talk about handling negativity. But before we start, could we go around and introduce everybody, starting with Mars, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you. Hi, this is Mars D. Gill, and my debut novel, Letters from the Queen, it came out last year, and it was received with great reviews and ratings. Look it up. My new book, Land of Dreams, is a women's fiction, domestic fiction subgenre. It's due to release this year. It's an own voices narration of what it is like to be a Sikh, like in an immigrant family in America. That's something that's really close to my heart because that's what my children are right now experiencing. I grew up near the foothills of Himalayas, and now I live in Chicago with my husband, and I have three rambunctious children. They keep me busy all day. And so when I'm not mothering or writing, I have a day job. I work for Allstate as an enterprise agile coach. I've been in the IT industry forever. I feel old, for 20 plus years. And I love to network with fellow authors. That's why I'm really excited to be here today, and especially talking about the subject of negativity. Do look me up on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It's Mars D. Gill. And I have a landing page, www.bookofdreams.us. That's the singular place if you wanted to get hold of everything for me. So I'm looking forward to the session. That's me.
Excellent. Patty, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Patty, and I write under the name P.L. Tavermina. I've been a scientist most of my life, and I recently retired from a career in science to begin writing fiction to bring as a means of science communication. So I've been a science fiction reader my whole life and a fantasy reader my whole life, and now I'm enjoying taking the science and the research and the writing skills that I developed through a career in science and bringing it to fiction. I also am really happy to be here. I think this is a fantastic panel and a fantastic topic, something we all have to face. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Laura.
Hi, I'm Lara Lillybridge, and I have published two memoirs. The first was called Girlish, Growing Up in a Lesbian Home. And the second is called Mama, Mama, Only Mama, which is about my 6 years as a single mother. And I co-edited an anthology with Andrea Facchetti called Feminine Rising, Voices of Power and Invisibility. And I write for children under the name LB Lillybridge. And I'm here in Cleveland, Ohio, and I have two kids. They are 13 and 15, and I have two cats that might show up.
Thank you. And animals are always welcome in anything that I'm hosting, so don't be shy. And finally, Jesse, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jesse Pullman. I'm a sci-fi writer from Long Island, New York. As far as things to say about myself, not much. I'm in the education field. I was a New York City teacher, for example, and I write sci-fi, I write fantasy. I make little Lego comics and change how figures look and try to have fun with that. I can't say that I come from a scientific background when it comes to the sci-fi stuff, but I think I'm more in it for the characterization anyway.
Well, thank you for joining us, and looking forward to this whole topic. I think the best jumping off point is identifying a negative comment or a negative, whether it's beta, especially with beta. Is it actually negative or is it constructive criticism? And how do you tell the difference? A lot of people have trouble with that. And anybody can answer.
So I guess I can go first. I feel like comments that you get before you publish is a blessing. And so my problem is the opposite. I take almost every comment, but I'll tell you this. This book that I am about to publish is my baby, right? That's how all authors approach their work, and we can't be not sensitive about our work. And so this was an editor's I admired a lot, and she gave me feedback and with very strong words, and I couldn't like get out of bed the next week. And and I was very defensive. I'm like, what does she know? Or she doesn't understand my character. And I was extremely defensive. But about after a week, I reared my head up. I cried out head up, and I dusted myself. And I took every single comment. And I can tell you with my chin up, I'm glad I did. Because if I didn't listen to her, my manuscript wouldn't be where it is today. I, in fact, even enrolled one of my biggest pet peeves for her, or any comment in a beta which tells you this is wrong, but they sort of don't tell you how to correct it, or you don't know what to do with it. I feel like those are not as useful versus someone who says, this is exactly how I felt. You're like, I get it. I know how to make this better. So I think in the beta critique giving, that's key. And so I did squeeze as much as I could from her comments, but there was a point after which I'm like, okay, I get it, but I don't know how to fix it. So I took a conference with an author I really, really admire, and she showed me the path forward. So if it wasn't the beta reader, it was the conference. I don't know if that helps or that touches the nerve at all.
I think for me, it depends. Sometimes I'm asking for beta readers from my target audience. Like I wrote a middle grade fiction fantasy, and I send it to middle grade readers. Their opinion, I take 100% because they are my target audience, and they don't necessarily know the rules of what's good writing, but they know what they like. And if they like something, or if they're confused, that's really important to me. But sometimes I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I'll ask someone to beta read, and really what I want is a cheerleader. And I really want someone to say, this is amazing. Like, this is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. And then those people generally think I actually want feedback, and then they give me feedback, and it takes me like a week to kind of put my ego aside and see if it's valid. And most of the time it is. And every now and then someone will say something that feels completely wrong to me. And when that happens, I just try and get another opinion. I just set it aside because either I am too sensitive and I just can't see this thing, or that person just had a bad day or wasn't the right reader for it, because that happens too.
I would say, in addition to that, discerning between a negative comment and constructive criticism, for me, you can sort of tell when people are not necessarily attacking you, but there's an aggression. Sometimes there's an aggression behind a comment. You feel an aggression. And other times, so the phrasing that you see online that we're all supposed to use is not, you should do it this way, but instead something like, I think what you're trying to do is to draw a sympathetic character here, and I'm not getting the degree of sympathy. If the critiquer puts it back on themselves and what their response is, rather than what you did wrong, then that tends to be a little more constructive, because we are learning that what we thought we were doing is not landing the way we expected. That'd be how I'd try to distinguish between negative feedback, and some of it can be so harsh and so negative that there's no question, and then constructive feedback.
Yeah, one of the things I did when I was teaching was grade papers, because I taught high school level and they make you write. And that's a good thing because the students always need to develop. So the question becomes, how do you give feedback that a reader can use to give you better advice? And I think the answer that I found was you always start with something positive. You always start with something that will make the person being critiqued feel good about what they did, see the positive aspects, And then you don't turn negative, you turn constructive and say, here are some things you could do next time, or you could have done with this that would make your situation a little better. And I think you have to apply that same methodology to, and reverse it a little bit, to analyze the feedback you get. Because if there's a reader who likes some things about your work but has some problems about it, that's fine. You can build from that. If there's a reader who doesn't like your work and tells you all the things wrong with it and none of the good, yeah, they might hit something on the head. They might get something that's not right in your book that you could fix. But in the meantime, you're enduring that bile and it's not good for you. And that's when you need to say, this is a line I'm not going to cross. This isn't a positive, reassuring, constructive comment.
Actually, I want to piggyback on what everybody said. And I think that when we have people beta read or just even read our stuff, I know my last book, I gave it to somebody who was a writer and somebody who wasn't a writer. And my writer friend gave me the constructive feedback in the sense of they knew what it was like to go through beta. And the other writer or the other person, while he had amazing feedback and his feedback was really, really good, he didn't always word it in the way that was perfect. So do you have any advice, because you do want people who aren't writers, do you have any advice for authors out there who are preparing a beta reader to make sure to reduce the amount of misunderstanding and the negativity that can arise from the misunderstanding with the comments?
I would say that I always advise people just do a small section to begin with to see if you're naturally a good fit or not, and to swap if you can. And now, if you're getting a beta reader from a reader and not a writer, then you can't really swap. But a swap on a small section, maybe 50 pages or less, then you're likely to see if you're both truly growing through the experience or not.
With non-writer beta readers, who I think are also equally as important, I like to give them a few things to focus on. Like, did this character feel believable? Did you like him or her or them? When did you get bored? I always ask, if you don't finish reading it, it's fine, but I want to know when you stopped, because that tells me where I have to speed up, where my story is lagging. And I really encourage them that it's okay to not finish, because to me, the baggy middle is my weakness, right? So I just really want to know, when is the reader going, oh my gosh, will you please get to the point? But by giving them a point where I'm allowing them to be negative, I think it maybe makes it easier for them to be able to be honest. And then I also ask, what did you like best? Which character was your favorite? Because I think, if nothing else, it makes me feel better about it.
Yeah, I like that. Laura, I do that too. In fact, I've given a set of questions that way. Sometimes that helps them focus on what feedback that you as an author are looking for too. But if I am the person giving that beta critique, something that I'm really mindful of is sandwich method. Or, how some people say that to fix one wrong or one negative, you need 5 positives. So I feel like, as a critique giver, if I can't point out what they're doing good or what's working for them, then there's a problem, because in order for feedback to be received in a constructive way, you tell them what to do more of and maybe what to do less of, and then you ask some open-ended questions and sort of explain why your feedback the way it was. Like I said in the past, if I get a feedback, something's not working for them, a reader, but I don't know why, that's what sort of keeps the feedback, I guess, incomplete. You're like, okay, I get it didn't work, but really what? And so I'm mindful of that when I'm giving a feedback, that it's something that someone can consume and do something with it.
Yeah, I got to start by saying, Mars, this is a great point. Giving a beta reader questions is a good way to go ahead and make sure that you're getting the feedback you need on the topics you need. And it gives them something to read for. It's like, hey, this is going to happen. I kind of know where this is going, so let's see where it plays out. I think, I can't remember, I think it was Patty who made the point that if you, I just lost it, sorry. If you give somebody a set of, I'm sorry, I lost the point. I lost the train. Such is life. I'm just going to say, hey, go in with 1 chapter or 2 chapters. That was the point, or 3 chapters, and do a small section of the book. See how you feel and relate to the writer or non-writer who's doing your beta reading, and go ahead with that. And if the relationship works, keep going with it.
All right, so that was all awesome. And I realize that that might be slightly off topic. It's more of preventative negative comments than afterwards. But I think that was great information. But on the subject of negative comments, what happens when you do get that negative comment? How do you process that negative beta comment to make sure that, one, it doesn't put you in like a food coma for a week or 2, but also that you can pull the positive out of the negative?
I guess we'll follow the order. I'll go first. So yes, I think sleeping on it is important. It's important not to react on your first emotion. And I think it's also okay to ask follow-up questions, because sometimes, on a very, very rare occasion, it's happened in my critique group that someone has had a trauma in their past, and because of which they're not able to be objective about it. And so I think that objectivity is very important. And so sometimes asking follow-up questions can help clarify. And so it's 2 things: sleep on it and see how objective the critique is. Yep.
I don't know if I'm next, but I'm going to jump in and be next. So I agree, time is so important, because we're so raw when we get the feedback. It's like our hearts pound when we see that returned manuscript or in critique group and we've just read the excerpt. It's like, I hope everybody loved it, but they're not gonna, it's like we all have so many diverse opinions. I would say, I've got I think it's going to be real personal. I think people need to do what works for them. I've got about a half a dozen different things that, depending on the situation, sometimes you just need a good friend who understands, who's a writer, who's been there, and you can get together with them and just cry about it or talk about how stupid that person is, big old meanie pants, stupid person. And then you get it off your chest, and that helps you get to the next day when you start to think, well, did they really actually have a point or not? And maybe you realize they do. So a good writer friend that you can sort of decompress with is really helpful. And that's a good reason to be in critique groups, is because you can build those friendships, and that's another reason networking is so great in the writing community. Another thing that I learned recently, because I had some super, super harsh feedback in a new critique group that I joined, this was really obvious to me. So this was one of those scenarios like Mars was describing, where you're laid out for like days after. It's so psychologically you're unmoored from it. It's so bizarre. I had a migraine for 3 days after getting this feedback. It was crazy. But the feedback wasn't about my writing. It was about the reader and the reader's situation and what the writing was pulling up in them. So I think we tend to think that they're saying our writing is bad if they have a negative reaction to something we wrote. We think it's on us to change that and make sure nobody ever has a negative reaction. But we all have these places inside that are pained. And if something is written that touches on that, sometimes the comment you get back is more about the person speaking than it is about your writing.
So I had an experience with Dragon Brothers, which was my middle grade fantasy, and I thought that it was done, and I sent it to a person that I thought was going to just do the final line editing, and she said to me, "This isn't ready. I know you think it's ready, but it's not." And I was devastated. I mean, I cried actual tears. It's the only time that feedback brought me to tears. And she felt terrible. Like it wasn't her fault. She was a writer and she was being very sincere. And I put it away for probably a month. But then what I did was I went through and I made the easy changes. Like, okay, I'm anything that's hard or that hurts my feelings too much or that I don't think is right, I'm just going to set it aside and I'm just going to make the easy changes. Things like you have a repeated word here, or you never, you went off on this tangent, never brought it home, the things that didn't hurt my feelings. And I did that round and that helped me get some distance from it. And then I went back through again and I did the next, and I would just keep putting the hard things away. And then by the end, I was ready to look at all of those things. And I didn't take all of them. I gave myself permission to have my own voice and to be a little disagreeable, but I took probably 85% of them. But I had to do it in little bits at a time. And at the end, the book was better for it.
Yeah, all three of you had really great things to say. I mean, Mars, you suggested sleeping on it, not reacting with the first emotion. Definitely. Laura, when you said that you got to leave the hard stuff for later and build on top of that, it seems like another way of narrowing the band a little bit and taking chunk by chunk by chunk, making an impossible task less impossible. And Patty said the search for understanding, and I found that the most interesting thing of all, because sometimes when you get really negative comments and they're penetratingly negative, they're not just like, oh, hey, I don't like this thing, but it's like, no, this thing is actually bad and it comes from a larger situation. You have the dual pressures of both your ego being wounded and the new task ahead being to construct this thing, whatever it's going to be in writing, that's going to be the solution to your problem. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. I find myself curating negativity out. Like if something is mostly negative, I will, perhaps to my detriment, just not let it through as much as I can, because I know that if I do, it'll sting, and the negativity will poison the optimism I need to make progress.
Yep, and if actually this sparked another idea on this question specifically, and something that I've done is get a second opinion. And so if you have, that's why I'm guilty of too many beta reads and too many critiques. I actually need to go the other way. But when I see two people give me consistent feedback, I really look at it, and I almost 100% take it. But sometimes when it's not quite consistent, even in the published work, the same thing is important, because there is one thing as it's my personal like. This is the type of stuff I like to read. This is not what I like to read. But it's another thing when you're getting the same feedback from a number of people.
That actually brings me to the next question is getting feedback from a beta reader is almost a safe space, because you have an area to be able to go back and address your work. But a negative comment online for your published work, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with a negative review, a Twitter comment about your book, and anybody can start?
I'll jump in with something I saw on Facebook that was beautiful. There was a woman who wrote a fantasy novel about a dark-skinned warrior princess, and she looked beautiful and ferocious on the cover, and it had a wonderful name and very stylized. And she got a 1-star review about, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago. And the 1-star review said simply, the book should have come with a warning. Okay, this is going to be offensive, but when you hear the end of the story, you're going to appreciate this. It said the book should have come with a warning that the protagonist was gay. 1 star. And the author, of course, was like, cut to the quick. And she didn't know what to do. And she was asking people. And what she ended up doing was taking that 1-star review and turning it into an ad, a Facebook ad. So it had 1 star and that little quote, and then her book. And she had 100 sales the next day. And so she said, for every person that wants to tear you down, there's 100 more out there that want to lift you up. I thought that was a fantastic way to handle, at least in that situation, a 1-star review.
That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
All right. So I'm that guy who once upon a time in his misspent youth would reply to comments on reviews on Amazon or whatever, and I've left them up for historical posterity. I was never the guy who would be mean to the person giving the review. I would only just say, like, I'm sorry you didn't like it. Here's what I was trying to do. And over the course of the years, and it didn't take too long, I learned not to do that because, A, the reviews are kind of for the reader. It's one reader's experience of a work with, their own context on it, and it's for readers to communicate with readers. But from another perspective, it's me trying to, somehow come to some sort of resolution on the fact that I don't feel good about this review. That, okay, you don't feel good about it, but it's better to take that lesson and apply it to your future writing than it is to try to look at your past writing and go, well, what did I mean to do with this?
I agree. I never, ever answer the comments. If they didn't understand what I was doing, reading the whole work, there's nothing I can say that's going to change their mind afterwards. I try so hard not to read the comments. My mantra is like, don't read the comments, don't read the reviews, but we can't help ourselves, right? Like you will, and you'll read like one and it'll be good. And you're like, yes, I can do this. I can read the next one. And then the next one will just crush you. But so what I did when my first book came out, I got one review by someone that just said that my book they'd never seen themselves before in a book, and that, that they cried and that it meant so much to them. And that was exactly why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I felt someone far away, hopefully not next door, but someone unknown had never seen themselves in a book. And I wanted to give them that. So that stranger gave me the feeling that I had done what I'd set out to do. And I cut that out and I put it in my wallet and I carried it with me. And so then when I would get that negative review of, I could still remember, it's like 3 years ago, that this person who hurt my feelings so much by saying, well, that wasn't my experience. And I still want to say, well, it's not supposed to be everyone's experience. It's my experience. It's a memoir. It's not a book about everybody, But I have that comment in my wallet that sort of answers for me, that reminds me that even if everyone doesn't get it, some people do.
I love it. Keep a review in your wallet that reminds you why you wrote the book. That's awesome. So the question was on already published work, right? And so when I published my book, it was my debut, right? So you're innocent when it's your debut. You haven't been scarred yet. So I was so worried. What was going for me was because I am my marketer and people are looking at my social media feed, and that's how in social media people look at you and then they get your product, right? It's the opposite versus someone stumbles on your book and then they leave a comments. One thing that I realized when in this channel, the reviews tend to be kinder. I don't know, maybe that's what it is. But I remember when I got this one review and it was 3 out of 5, which is not bad, which is an awesome review. But I don't know. I was looking at it and then I pulled up a book that I really, really admire. And it was 3.8 average. And I'm like, no, this is the best book in the world. It's 5 out of 5. And then I went to their 1 stars and oh my God, those were nasty comments. So I know we authors compare ourselves to the authors we envy that we were right like. But I did the opposite. I do love these authors. I was looking at the negative comments, and sometimes that helps, that it's a really, really treacherous industry out there. And look at this book, it's famous and it's successful and has these reviews. And just because you have these reviews as well doesn't mean that you failed in some way. It means you actually reached more audience, enough number of people to find differences. And so another thing I take it to heart, I do look for consistency in reviews. Like one of my readers post-publishing said, hey, the ending was rushed. It left me wanting more. You rushed to an end. I said, okay, thank you. And then the very next day, literally, I don't know, it was poetic justice or I don't know what it was. Someone said, hey, the first half of the book was slow, but the second half, the pace was so good. It was just right. And so then I'm like, okay, maybe it's personal likes and what this person individual likes to read. But if I do learn something, I like to apply it forward. And not like that you cannot publish further revisions of your own work, published work, you can. It's not hard and fast that you cannot, but I do try to apply the lessons forward.
I think one thing that's really useful to keep in mind too is that just how, this sort of baked into this whole idea is that we do have so many diverse opinions in the world, and everybody responds to a book differently. And it is remarkable that the best book in the world, the book that formed your life, has 1-star reviews. It's mind-boggling to me as well that this happens. But if you think about, well, would you rather live in a world where everybody thought the same or in a world where everybody had different opinions? I think all of us would say, no, we definitely want to live in the world where everybody has different opinions. Plus that allows more books, because we don't all have to write to the same audience. But that means 1-star reviews.
Yeah, it is.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say it's really humbling and awing to go down through your favorite books reviews, because in some instances you'll see something get a 5-star review for the exact same reason somebody gave it a 1-star review, and it really does highlight that you could have done something perfectly right for one person and it's the exact opposite for another.
Someone much wiser than I am said that if someone bothers to write a review, even if they hated your book, you got inside their head and they thought about it and they engaged with it and it meant something to them, as opposed to a reader that reads the book, reads half the book, goes, throws it aside and never bothers to write a review. And they view that as positive feedback. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it because I'm not always that evolved, but I liked that idea. And I know that as a writer, when I look at books or anything that I'm going to buy, and if it has 5 reviews that are all 5-star, I go, okay, so they had their friends review it. But when you see a 4-star, a 3-star, a 1-star, I give more weight to the 5 stars because now I know that they're real reviews.
I love that approach. I love that you search for the stuff that isn't there. And when you don't see it, you go, oh, hey, this may not be quite an honest set of reviews, and the reader feedback might not be the same. I love that. Yeah, and just what you guys have been saying about turning this negative into a positive is really touching, because that's something I've got to do better with.
Go right ahead.
I wanted also to state that there is merit to authentic reviews. When you look at a book and you see a mix of reviews, and it's not all 5 stars down the. I haven't really seen a book. There you want authentic reviews. So if you get these negatives, if you get a mixed bag, that's I genuinely feel that's better for your book.
I mean, I will be honest, I bought a book because of a negative review once where they said, I bought this book expecting to hear stories about this movie being made, but the book's name was The Science Behind the Movie. And they're like, this was too scientific. And I'm like, this is the book I want to read. So I'm just going to take 2 seconds and look at my notes just to make sure I don't miss anything. We had some people from the community write in some questions, so I want to make sure I get all of their questions. All right, so this is something that we kind of already touched on, but this was asked by a couple people, so I want to make sure with all types of negative comments, whether it's from a beta reader or from a publisher or a friend or whatnot, or a review, how do you bounce back from that?
You keep on writing. That has helped me a lot. And fortunately, writing is addicting. It's easy to keep on writing. But there are a lot of things that were mentioned today, and I feel that is so true. Like Lara, you mentioned you hang on to those positive reviews. I think it's important. There's so much negativity. Anything positive you get, put it up, blow it up, put it in your space. We authors are very critical because we are also editors, right? So an editor needs to find the negative. Well, I won't use the word negative since it's confusing with our topic, but constructive. We need to take out the weeds. We need to be critical. And so it's difficult to balance the editor and the writer who writes for the love of it. And so, so I think it's important to surround yourself with that positivity. Because it's really it's what we do is it is sensitive. You can't hide behind. You are putting parts of your really core out there when you publish, and that's the truth.
So, some of the things that occur to me as to how we get past some of this negativity, I for sure think that time, which Mars has mentioned, and cheerleaders, which I think was also Mars, but cheerleaders goes along with the idea of hanging on to those positive reviews, because we do tend to downplay the positive and internalize the negative, and that's ridiculous. We can internalize the positive and downplay the negative. There's nothing to say that we can't do that. So cheerleaders are good. Holding the positivity close is very good. Sometimes I really like to think about other artistic endeavors like sculpting and painting. I mean, you could imagine the first time Picasso or Dali or somebody put a painting out and it looked nothing like anything that anybody ever expected, but it was what he was trying to do. And it was sort of his voice that he was trying to build and develop. And, when you think about your writing, like an artistic endeavor like that, I think that it frees you up to say, no, I am trying to do something. I have a vision. I have a reason for doing this, and I'm growing by doing it. And I think growing is also an important part of this for me anyway, that, you don't have to be a perfect author, a perfect writer, a perfect anything when you start out. Nobody is. Look at any sport, look at anything. People get better by doing things. And if on your 10th publication, you are a stronger writer than you were on your first publication, nobody's going to say, yeah, but that first one wasn't very good. It's just, you're going to get to that next point. So I think, I think writing, continuing to write, continuing to grow, continuing to value yourself and the reason that you're in it. I think all of those things can help sort of reframe why you're doing this to begin with.
So I have 3 things to say. The first, I have a writing friend named SM Rafi who started the Twitter hashtag of Team Optimism. And she collects people to do positivity passes. And sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need to send 5 pages to someone and say, just tell me what you like. Like, I just need to have some faith in myself again. And I have found writing those for other people also really helps me as a writer. And when you get those positivity pages back, it's like, oh, I can do more of that. And oh, do more of the good stuff. I'm really good at this. I'm going to do more of that. Then the things that are weak, they don't hurt so much because it's like, oh, I don't care about that anymore because this is my strength. You know, I'm going to really lean into this, you know, for me, like weirdness, like writing something that's really experimental and strange. Like, I'm going to just really weird this up. And it gives me like a new way to look at it. The second thing is, now I don't remember, I had 3 things. Now I only had 1 thing. Is to do something different. When I have a project, and it's just broken my heart, I just try and write something completely different. Like, I write memoir and then I write fantasy. Just something completely that makes me think about writing as a beginner and awakens my joy. The other thing was, this writer said to me, when she looks at her earlier work, she thinks of it as a snapshot for who she was when she wrote the book. And she would maybe write it differently now, 10 years later and 5 books later, than that first book. But she said, it's like when you see a picture of yourself at 16 and you have pimples and you have crazy hair and too much eyeliner, you still love that kid, right? It's just, that's where you were at the time. And when I look at my first book, I think it was exactly what I wanted it to be when I wrote it. And I'm not done writing. I can write again and again and again. But that sort of standing back and saying, it's not the be all and end all. This is not the only book I will ever write. That helped me.
Yeah, writing is addicting. I love that statement because it's so true. It's almost an escape, and that's why when you get negative feedback, when you hit that wall, you think to yourself, all right, my escape is now ruined. I think that's an important thing to think of when you encounter the negativity, because again, it's that ed psych thing where you take a concept and you flip it. You take the fact that you're getting negative feedback and you say, all right, I know there's a lot of negative here. I'm going to toss all of that. What's in here that's positive, if anything? And if not, is it worth really evaluating on its own merits? Laura, I think actually, now that you mention it, it's funny. Team Optimism and the Positivity Passes, I think Right Hive has a Positivity Passes channel. So that's something people might want to check out. Or if I'm wrong and there isn't one, maybe that's something that people would like to see. And maybe the powers that be can make that happen. And then, Patty, you said time is distance, nobody's perfect, and ain't that true?
For such a negative topic, this is bringing me so much joy. Hearing you all speak about overcoming negativity is actually very empowering, because I think it's something we all go through. I mean, I myself am a writer and have been through all sorts of ups and downs. And actually, I'm going to my next question, and it may actually just have an answer similar to what we have already, but has been asked by the community, is the querying process is it's a challenge, to say the least. Everybody, unless they're very lucky or very, very talented, has had to deal with rejection from a query from, either a publisher or an agent. How do you pick yourself back up after that? How do you, especially in a world where probably 90% of those rejections are form letters that come with no feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I remember one rejection I got really well because it actually had some feedback in it, or it at least said like, hey, this is a nice piece. We like this about it, but it doesn't fit. So getting some degree of feedback from a query letter is really important because it helps you figure out what you're going to query going further. But unfortunately, it's about really all I can add because I went the self-publishing route. So I'm querying everybody in a sense because, hey, that's just kind of what self-publishing is about.
I agree. Anytime that someone is willing to write you personalized rejection from a query, that is gold. I mean, they have actually gone beyond your email to read some of your pages. Maybe they read all of your pages. And even if they didn't like it, there was something in there that got them to read it. And that feedback to me is gold, but I haven't gotten much of it. You know, most of my rejections are those form letters, and it can be really hard not to give up on yourself. On the other hand, I have traditionally published, but I have self-published. There was a point where I just said, look, I want this book out while my kids are young enough to enjoy it. And I'm going to do that. And I'm really proud of that book too. I'm equally proud of it. So, but yes, then you have the reviews are like the answers to your queries in some way, and you are querying every person to buy it. But one thing I found is that the better I researched the places I submitted to, the better my chances were of getting good feedback. With my first book, I went with the wallpaper, the internet technique of querying, where I queried every single person. It was like, oh, you like books? Well, I have a book. Well, you like science fiction? Well, this is a memoir about lesbians. It's very similar to science fiction. You know, I mean, I just was like, anybody, if you read it, I'm sure you'll like it. And that's not how the world works. In the end, the place that picked it up was the only like personalized query letter that I wrote. It was the only one that I had actually researched and was able to say, this is why I think I am a good fit for you. And I think that there is a lot of value in that. Still, it's not foolproof, but it takes time. And when you're excited about your book, so sometimes you just throw everything on the wall and just hope something will stick. But you do get a lot of crickets.
So the strategy that Laura had mentioned on reviews, like you hang on to those positive reviews, I actually used that while I was querying. And there was this one publisher for the book that's coming out. And they said, hey, they asked for the whole manuscript, and they had really, they spoke highly about it. I could tell that it struck a chord. And then I gave them the manuscript, and they gave me more positive feedback. And they said, you have cleared round 2. And now it's about how much money you make. That's where all my books fail. It's for the publishers, the business case, because, you know, like my passion goes through, but really it's all about money at the end of the day for the publisher. And so for all of the other rejections that I get, and you know, sometimes the rejections, what I've learned now, as many rejections as I've gotten, is sometimes it looks personalized, but it's not. It's when you get the exact same, like a big long paragraph, but for a very different genre, you get the exact same thing. You're like, last time I thought it was personalized. Oh, it wasn't really personalized, was it? But anyway, I latch on to that one publisher who took it to 3 rounds, and then they felt like, because they had rights of publishing in one country but not in America, and so there was a little bit of that going on. And so I always remind myself of that. And yes, sometimes I tell myself I'm impatient, but I'm an enterprise agile coach. So for me, the feedback is from our real customers, our readers, right? And so that's why I like self-publishing so far. I dislike all the barriers in the paths of indie authors. but I still feel those are brick walls we can shatter. But yeah, so I like self-publishing because I'm working for myself.
Yeah, me as well. I like what Jesse said about, and what Lara repeated, and now what I guess we all like it about this idea of the reader being the people we are querying in the end. I would add to all of this stuff, which is great. I queried my first novel over 100 times. I had a couple of requests, and those go a long way to make you feel like, okay, you know, it's not the bottom of the slush pile. It's okay. But you know, if a couple of agents wanted to take a look at it, it had something going for it. So that, you know, that helps. But I would also say that I would bring this back around to critique groups and say, if you're in a critique, if we are in critique groups and we are seeing the manuscripts that we love being written by fellow writers, and we know the value in these stories because we're reading them and we're critiquing them and we're loving them, and then we see it, and then we see that writer go into the querying stage, we know that book is wonderful. And so, you know, so when they have difficulty querying, it just, you know, it's like you start to see just how subjective this is, and the fact that there are so many good books out there. There's so many that will never be picked up because people are so good at telling stories. And the other part of the rejection of those 100, however many rejections I got, you know, those agents who didn't request the full, they didn't read the book. They got a couple of pages and that was it, you know, so it didn't draw them in. But they didn't, you know, they have no judgment on the book. They didn't see it. So that also helped me anyway.
That's exactly what I wanted to say. If you are sending out queries and you are getting no responses, it means you need to work on your query letter. It does not mean you need to work on your book. It means that your marketing of yourself and your selling of yourself needs some refinement. If they're reading 10 pages and that's as far as they've gotten, well, your query letter was good because I asked for 10 pages. Now look at what 10 pages you sent. I see people that continually tear apart their book, but their book isn't actually, you know, what is being rejected. It is an email. And there's a lot of great resources out there for querying. And if you're getting no responses, I would start with that first and not take it to mean that your book doesn't have a home.
Yeah, it seems like one of the general themes, especially in this section, is that with querying, because it is such a competitive field, you know, we just see how many people that we know that are authors that are sending out queries, is that just because it's not being picked up doesn't mean it's not good. And we shouldn't take that rejection from that agent we wanted as the end all be all, I should quit writing.
Something that helped me also was I started reading for a literary magazine, and I saw how many really great essays get rejected just because they're not the right fit for this magazine. Perhaps they've never read this magazine and their style is not the same, or they submitted fiction and we're creative nonfiction, or we just did an issue that was devoted to a topic that now it's too soon to look at again. And there's so many times that people get rejected that has nothing to do with the quality of their writing, but it has to do with where they're submitting it to, if they followed the rules, because if it says 4,000 words and you send them 4,500, oftentimes some places won't even read it. You know, like in my head, I think, oh, they'll read it and then they'll tell me to cut 500 words. No, they'll just say ignored guidelines and throw it away. So doing your research first is important. But just knowing that other people are getting rejected and that really good work is getting rejected for just because it wasn't the right time and place helped me be a little bit gentler with myself.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have anything to say other than you're not alone is really good advice. You're not the only person who's out there trying to get their book sold, whether it's to a publisher or to a reader directly. And even if you land a publishing deal, you're still pitching the book to readers. So it's something that all writers have to kind of bear in mind. Yeah, you're not alone. If you're out there querying right now, just go ahead and knock that query off. Don't be afraid to seek help with your query letter. That was another good point, was that, sometimes it's the querying letter that's the problem, not the content of the book that you're trying to sell.
Excellent. All right, so I think I'm going to wrap this up with one very simple question to end this. And again, this is one we sort of touched on, but it was definitely asked, should you read the reviews?
Never, 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 never. I can't help myself, but never, never, never.
I would say if you want to read them, read them. You know yourself better than anybody. Read them if you want, don't read them if you don't want. I read a few of the early ones, and then I thought, okay, well, I'm on to the next book, and I'm not even thinking about that old book anymore.
That's what I would
Yeah.
say if you want to read it. It's just you need to know how to handle it.
So I think of it like you're on a starship and you're about to go near some fiery nebula, and you're like, hey, crank up the shields because we're about to go near a fiery nebula, and that can have consequences. It's fine to read the reviews because sometimes you will find really useful stuff that you can use to improve your writing. There's no doubt about it that sometimes people will give you really solid feedback that you can apply towards whatever your next project is. But some people might be there just to take you down. Some people might be there just to take you down because of your race or your gender or your sexual identity. It's the sort of thing where you have to know that sort of thing can come up and be prepared for it to come up, and then be able to separate it out from yourself and say, this isn't about me. This is about, or it's definitely not about my writing. It's about someone else's problem that they have with themselves that's leading them to conflict with me.
That's awesome. And I will forever go forward and think about raising my shields before going into reading any sort of reviews or comments. I want to thank you all for joining me. This has been an amazing discussion, and I urge everybody to go out and seek all of these authors' amazing works.